Welcome to MetroSTL. I'm your host, Antonio French. We start today with part 3 of our 4-part series, Benign Neglect, which examines the history of decline in North St. Louis. In parts 1 and 2, we talked about the legacy of the Team 4 plan, which called for a reduction of investment and essential services in the predominantly black neighborhoods of North City. This led to a lowering of property values and a mass exodus of the remaining middle-class population, and a huge increase in the number of vacant buildings and lots. The hope being that the high vacancy and low property values would allow a future player to come in, buy the land, and redevelop it into something found more desirable by the city. In part 3, our George Sales looks at what happened in the early 2000s as someone began to do exactly that through a tangled web of shell companies, all leading back to one man, Paul McKee.
A big part of today's story of North St. Louis comes with one of our city's most perplexing set of questions. Just who is Paul McKee and what is he trying to accomplish? Is he the man who set the table for the largest investment in the North Side's history? Or is he the man who bought up over 1,000 properties and let most of them rot? Is he the visionary who sees hope for the North Side and has said so with his pocketbook? Or is he a profiteer who has been part of putting families out of their homes? In one way or another, the answer to all of these questions is yes. Despite repeated requests, Paul McKee declined to be interviewed for this report.
It's horrible. They don't want to come and cut it. They wait till it grows up so high that the babies can go and hide and you can't find them.
Jerry Whitaker wasn't aware who the owner of the lot next door is, but in fact, it's Paul McKee. He owns the vacant buildings adjacent to that as well. His quiet ownership and lack of maintenance are a signature, according to his critics. They say it's the way he has tried to clear property and accumulate large tracts of North Side land to develop, a strategy that goes all the way back to the Team 4 plan of the 70s.
Some citizens living in the community kept their property up, but then a property next to it was allowed to deteriorate. That brought down the value of the property it was next to. And then, of course, those people were saying they were being, constantly annoyed about, you better hurry up and move out before your property value deteriorates more than what it is now, because it'll be down to practically nothing. So those kind of tactics were used to force people out.
Some call it blockbusting.
Blockbusting, I think, also in this case is how McKee was able to depress property values to scare people, because if you're the last person on the block and every other building's being broken into or burned down in the middle of the night,
you've got to sell.
It's scary, it's dangerous, it's not safe.
Michael Allen would know about Paul McKee. He has spent years unraveling the mystery of the man. It's a mystery that dates back to around 2005 when Allen was with the city's landmarks division. He noticed a lot of buildings being bought up by different companies in North City, but they all shared something in common.
It's like 50 properties show up all over a very concentrated area just north of downtown. So I was looked at the mailing address, just curiously punched that in. 6 other companies sharing the same address of a downtown real estate office, buying in that same area. I thought, this is big.
Allen blew the whistle, and soon the name Paul McKee was becoming well known. When it finally became clear McKee was buying up property with shell companies and there was no longer a need for secrecy, he conducted a merger. State records show him consolidating 13 different outfits back in 2009. Who owned them all? Check the signatures. They were all Paul McKee's.
I think the real reason for the clandestine buying was to avoid publicity, not because he was really worried about having to pay people more. He went to the state and got a tax credit and got half the money back. So it was more, I think, the political firestorm, because McKee was a young contractor starting out in the 70s. He would have been very well aware of Team 4 and the political blowback.
Even today, searching for clues about McKee can be challenging. For example, if you Google his company, Northside Regeneration, you'll be given an address on North 11th Street. The address listed and the one appearing in city property records are different, by the way. The building has been empty when we have visited, and Missouri's Secretary of State associates a St. Charles County address with the company, not this one. Those St. Charles connections may be another reason McKee was being so hush-hush.
And I think if the word had spread quickly that a wealthy white developer, best known for Winghaven in the suburbs, was buying up North St. Louis, his project would have been over before it started. He needed the secrecy, I think, to especially build relationships with Northside politicians.
Third Ward Alderman Brandon Bosley is one of those politicians.
Of course, I have issues with how things conspired. I have issues with the way things still.
It was kind of shady.
Oh, it's very shady.
He would seem a likely McKee nemesis, but that is not the case. Why?
Paul McKee took what everybody else was saying no to and said, I'm going to say yes to it. You can be pissed off at him about it. Of course, and I've told him before, I don't like the fact, you don't keep your properties up. I don't like the fact you don't cut the grass regularly. Like, I have my qualms with the way he conducts business, but am I mad about the fact that he saw the diamond in the rough before everybody else? He did.
Once he was outed, McKee began talking about that vision for the North Side that made Bosley and some others take notice. Artist renderings of things shiny and new raised eyebrows and even caused excitement. The trouble is, for the most part, these things never got past the drawing board. Bob Lewis, that former Team 4 consultant you heard from earlier, has also worked as a consultant for Paul McKee.
The Paul McKee case is a classic as a start of somebody who really wanted to do good and reinvest in St. Louis, or so it seemed. I think Paul, however, got caught in a situation where he really wasn't that good at it.
Not good at it because you don't need to just buy up properties to get a big project underway. You need community buy-in. You don't tend to get it when the properties you own look like this, or this, or this. And that's before you even get into the perceived efforts to hide what you've been doing.
Unfortunately, that doesn't play well in community development because it looks like you're being shady, or it looks like you're hiding something. His actions at the state legislature with some of the tax incentives that he got passed looked like they were only for him. Which is, then it starts to look a little politically shady.
But those upkeep issues proved to be the biggest downfall. McKee is accused of being a slumlord, largely because of the fact so many of his properties are in such complete disrepair.
When he was very, very active, his tactics definitely included, I think, intentional neglect. There's nothing, he never said that was his goal, but the conditions of not cutting grass, of letting buildings get stripped, there's one night when 8 buildings were burned all at once, most of them owned by his companies. And then the wreckage piles were still there. Actually, 1 or 2 of them still are there. It's like the foundation's full of the rubble of the buildings. And that was in 2008.
Yes, this overgrown area was 2621 Sullivan back in 2008. If you look back inside the weeds, you can see what is left of that house that burned more than a decade ago and was never cleaned up. So for more than a decade, McKee has been gathering up property. This gas station pictured on the front of his website is the most visible completed project. But what is underway is the place where some are giving him credit. NGA West, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, is being built in part on McKee land. The $1.7 billion government campus may be the largest project in the city's history. All of the city. And some give McKee the credit for getting it rolling.
Hell, the mayor's office acted like they didn't know anything about it. This man is going around assembling all of this land, and you're going to act like it's not happening. They never expected anything like the NGA to come. They never expected him to actually have an ability to do something with it. A lot of people don't know, but Paul McKee is the one who petitioned and actually started the process on the NGA. It wasn't the city of St. Louis. Had it been left up to the city of St. Louis, we wouldn't have that project right now. The project would not be here.
Of course, not everyone sees that as a bad thing.
We live 2314. That empty space right there would be where our home used to be.
Gustavo Rendon and his wife were among the families displaced by the NGA project. According to the city, most sold and went willingly, but Gustavo, who every Sunday night at sunset comes to the site to protest, did not want to leave. He points to this letter he received from the office of then-Mayor Francis Slay, saying, among other things, that Slay would not support eminent domain for owner-occupied properties. In the end, 4 such homes were taken.
For a while, I remember trying to avoid coming across cash because, it was, kind of sad to remember that the house, our home, used to be there. Basically, anybody that can say, I can do better than what that person is doing. I can improve the public image by taking over that person's property, and the city would just do it for them.
What happens to the remainder of McKee's properties, and there are hundreds of them, remains to be seen. Some still hold out that his vision for a regenerated North Side can be moved forward, but few believe it's likely he will be the one to lead any such renaissance.
If he could afford to have built something of scale, it probably would have been occupied. My challenge to Paul is he just never really took that risk, or didn't feel like he was in a position to be able to build something of scale.
I think the best hope is to figure out ways in which other projects need his properties and to facilitate sales. I mean, I think all along he was banking on the value of that land.
And Paul, I think, had the right idea, just for whatever reasons, and I really don't know the real reasons, it couldn't pull it off and hasn't pulled it off. And yet the opportunity, I think, is still there.
But future opportunity means little when the here and now is an eyesore.
Why are they waiting to take them buildings down? They there for anybody can snatch the little babies around here. Then it shows some concern then. They need to do something about that. All the lots over there, come on now.
She wants demolition because that seems to be the latest answer being touted around North St. Louis. But is that the best thing for the future? We'll address that in our final report. George Sells, MetroSTL.com.
Joining me now is MetroSTL.com managing editor George Sells. Great piece, George.
Thank you.
So in your investigation, people have very different opinions about Paul McKee and what he's doing. Some people feel like he is the guy that is bold enough to come in and finally turn around this area that's been long neglected. And other people feel like he is profiting, using his political connections, and essentially just a large slumlord who isn't making the area better at all for the people who live there. What did you think?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'd like to say is we really would have loved to have interviewed Mr. McKee for this story. We worked really hard to get an interview with him. They chose not to speak, and so we were left talking to other people. And I think that what you really came to, Bob Lewis was one who was a particularly good source in this story because he has worked with Paul McKee and he has consulted Paul McKee. And his feeling, and the take I got kind of in general, is that Paul McKee, like any businessman, is in it looking to make some money. Bob described him as being somewhat well-intentioned, painted that kind of a picture, but once he got into the process of buying up this property and then trying to reach out to the community so he could do something, he just wasn't very good at it. That's the impression you get, is that this is a guy who understands the concepts of business, understands the concepts of doing things quietly so you can keep the values from inflating. That's what you would do as a business person, trying to buy something at the lowest price possible. But none of that works really well when all the neighbors start looking around and thinking you're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And that's really what has gotten him to this point. The fact of the matter is, though, he's not going anywhere anytime soon. Paul McKee still owns a massive chunk of land in North St. Louis, particularly in that section around the new NGA project, and we'll get into that in part 4. But Paul McKee will be a part of any kind of regeneration of the North Side, even if it just involves him selling that property to somebody else.
I think part of the frustration for folks is that the state has allotted millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars that have gone to Paul McKee in the form of tax credits. The city has also expended tens of millions of dollars over there, especially prepping that area for the NGA. And no one who has lived there has experienced any of the benefit of it. And that is frustrating. The other thing about Paul McKee is from the beginning, he laid out this vision and he sold his plan on, I think the number was $8 billion development that he promised for that area. Still, we haven't seen anything at all.
And according to Bob Lewis, it's because he didn't have the guts. At the end of the day, that's kind of what he said, that McKee had everything in place to do something that would have probably, to some degree or another, lived up to what those promises were. Maybe not completely, but at least made a dent. And it was going to require risk. And for reasons that really only Paul McKee knows, he never took that risk.
Yeah, well, he got in a lot of trouble with some other projects of his and led to some financial troubles that made him maybe risk averse.
Absolutely.
Thank you, George. Next, we take a look at a local art festival that's breaking world records. Paint St. Louis 2019 brought over 200 street artists to the Mississippi riverfront over the weekend for a celebration of hip-hop culture through art and graffiti.
It's a 20-year-old celebration of hip-hop that originated in St. Louis.
People started coming from like all over the world, like Germany and Brazil and Greenland and Australia. So now it's international. You know, Guinness Book of World Records came down here. We got the Guinness Book of World Record, longest mural in the world. So a lot of people from St. Louis don't even know that. Like they just don't. A lot of people from St. Louis don't even know about this.
Organizers say Paint Louis 2019 is one of the biggest street art festivals in the world.
You know, this is a catchy name that we came up with. We was like, how can we call it? Because we painting in St. Louis, trying to come up with names. So we was like, oh, Paint and Saint, Paint Louis. So this is the 22nd year. We've been doing it for 22 years.
Held every year during Labor Day weekend near the Mississippi River floodwall, Paint Louis gives artists the chance to tell their story through graffiti.
But you never really get to go to a festival or an event where the art is the main part. And our canvas is a 20-foot high, 2.5-mile wall. This is the 22nd year. We've been doing it for 22 years. Like right now, I think we got about 250, 275 artists out here painting. So I know we registered solid 212, but people keep showing up, can we paint? Showing up, can we paint? We're like, yeah, you can paint.
Spray cans and paint rollers stretch for miles and miles.
As a citizen of St. Louis, like, I pretty much rent this wall from the city 4 days a year, but you can come down here anytime and paint during the year. We've been doing this since '95. It's like the mecca of graffiti artists, street artists, muralists around the country, around the world. So you got people that come here from like Australia saying like, I've been wanting to come here my whole life. I've been seeing the videos and the magazines and watching it on YouTube, and I finally was able to get up enough money to come here. So for them, it's like a traveling to Mecca, traveling to like, you know, the graffiti capital of the world, because, you know, you got every crew from all over the country here, or a representative from most of the crews all over the country here.
Looking for local talent? You'll find St. Louis native Jason Spencer and well-known painter Kababi Bayak.
I've been working on a giant, alien monster fish kind of character. I pretty much only like to do like characters and just, you know, make them disgusting and bright and colorful. And this is, you know, one of the biggest like monsters I've been able to do, because the sheer scale of the flood wall is pretty cool to deal with. It's been awesome so far. Like, got to meet out-of-town artists and, you know, painting beside some of my friends that are also, you know, amazing artists too. So it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm recreating one of my dad paintings for my 365 Days of Dad series. And the title is Yellow Sweatshirt. I just taught myself how to spray paint, so I wanted to just come down here and do something big and see what I learned. So it's going well so far. You just put your mind to something and just go for it, you know, and especially like being out here not knowing really how to do it yet, you just gotta be fearless, man. And you only get there by practicing, so this is just a big old practice piece.
I just think that people in St. Louis need to come down and look at it and see the art for what it's worth, because a lot of people don't remember or don't know that graffiti is the fourth element of hip hop.
Bria Grimion, MetroSTL.com.
Joining me now is Bria Grimion from the Northsider newspaper. Hey, Bria, thanks for joining us.
Hi.
So this seemed like such a cool event. What made it so special?
I think the thing that made this event very unique was the fact that this was the 22nd year that Paint Louis had been held in St. Louis. It started back in 1995, and one of the things the organizer, John Harrington, mentions was that a lot of people in St. Louis don't know about Paint Louis. So he just mentioned that it was a family-friendly event that celebrated hip-hop through graffiti.
Yeah, that's great. Now, did it start off mostly with local artists, and now artists come from all over?
It definitely started with the local undertone here in St. Louis. A lot of local artists began to go to the Mississippi riverfront just to paint on that 20-mile-high flood wall, and it is 2.25 miles long, and it broke a Guinness World Record for the longest mural in the world.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. Do they do anything throughout the year, or is this just a one annual event they do?
Paint Lewis is an organization filled with different artists, and so they do host events throughout the year, but Paint Lewis is one of their bigger events.
All right, well, thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Lastly, we turn to the topic of gun violence. 2019 is shaping up to be another deadly year in the city of St. Louis. The city is on pace for another 2,000 people shot and nearly 200 people murdered, including several children. It is the child murders that has put pressure on police and politicians to address this crisis. Last week, several of those politicians appeared at a special town hall meeting at Harris Stowe University to hear directly from frustrated and angry citizens.
All right. Hey. I come and stand before you. My daughter was victim 125. She was shot with an AK-47 along with her friend Devin Fletcher. And I ask, we have so many programs that's out here that nobody wants to take a stance, listen to, or be a part of. I'm waiting. I'm waiting on Mr. Reed. I'm waiting on you. I'm waiting on you, Chief. I'm waiting on you, Miss Lydia Cruzen.
This is not about a blame game. This is not a Mayor Lyda Cruzen problem. This is not a Congressman Lacey Clay problem. This is not the Board of Aldermen's problem. This is not our state reps problem. This is a community problem.
It doesn't have to be like this. It does not have to be like this. We don't have to accept this level of violence.
I need you to do two things right now. First, we have two identical letters that I'd like you to sign and give back to my staff. They're addressed to Senator Roy Blunt and Senator Josh Hawley, urging them to demand that Majority Leader Mitch McConnell call back the U.S. Senate back into session to immediately pass two enhanced background checks bills, H.R. 8 and H.R. 1112.
The bill that Congressman Clay is carrying can be one of those things to help transform this nation. So I'm here to tell you tonight that St. Louis, this is our time. I know the days have been dark and the times have been tough, but this is our time to rise up and show this nation what change looks like.
African American boys bear the brunt of gun violence as perpetrators and victims in the city of St. Louis. We have to be more outraged on many levels.
In St. Louis and across this nation, we are faced with an ugly, obscene, inescapable truth. Gun violence is a public health emergency. It's an emergency.
And if we're going to call gun violence a public health issue, we have to get to the root causes. And it means that there will be many different initiatives and factors that will have to go into addressing what is going on in the city of St. Louis.
Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for attending tonight's citywide town hall forum.
Joining me now is Bill Bean, reporter from the Northsider newspaper. Thanks, Bill. So you were there at the town hall meeting. It appeared that things got a little heated at some point. What was the overall mood of the crowd?
Well, there were a lot of angry people there, you know, a lot of emotional people there. You know, there were people wearing shirts with their loved ones on them who had been killed. People wanted answers. People wanted to talk. Some people were in tears. Some people ended up yelling. And everyone didn't get a chance to get heard. You know, it's really hard. There's a lot of people. So it got out of hand for a little while there.
Mm. And were they directing their anger at any particular person or, you know, department of government?
Yes, some at the mayor, some let's see, some at the police department. Like the one guy there was one guy who got carried out.
Yeah, what was going on with that?
Yeah, because he was upset, like a lot of people there, that the case hasn't been solved yet. That their child's been killed and the case hasn't been solved. They call the police station, they don't give me any answers, things like that. So yeah, it got pretty bad.
It's frustrating for a lot of people because every year so many people are shot and killed in St. Louis, and most of those cases, over 50%, go unsolved. Police will say that they aren't getting the cooperation from the community. Was that addressed at all? Was there any talk about trying to bridge this gap between the police and the community?
There was, like you said, a lot of them, do feel like that. One lady was saying that, it's not her job. She's not a police officer. That kind of thing. Meanwhile, police were saying that, yeah, we do need your help, and sometimes they do. But beyond that, it was just a lot of back and forth. They weren't going to come with any answers then. They just wanted to hear what the people had to say. There was one young lady, I believe it was Coffee Wright. She talked about getting protection for witnesses who come forward, because oftentimes they're afraid that something's going to happen to them.
Yeah, that's a very real concern. I understand that there is going to be another one of these events for folks who couldn't attend the first one.
Yeah, so the Public Safety Commission, automatic, they're going to hear from the people who couldn't be heard there or who couldn't make it. So, yeah. And then tonight, 6 p.m., St. Louis Public Schools also has a town hall on violence.
Well, the issue is getting a lot of attention right now. Thanks for your report.
Sure.
And now a final thought. The violence we've seen this year in St. Louis is nothing new. As I mentioned earlier, every year, on average, 2,000 people are shot in St. Louis and roughly 200 people die as a result of those gunshots. It has earned St. Louis a reputation for being one of the most violent places in America. There are some here who argue that that label is unfair because the city's crime stats are separate from the larger region. Not only are they wrong, many other cities would argue the same thing, Baltimore, Chicago, New York City. They would all love to make their city appear safer by using a different formula, but they are also missing the greater point. Even as the violence is currently measured by dividing the number of violent acts by the total population of the city, it already hides an awful truth. The majority of this violence occurs in the same neighborhoods, relatively small populations, year after year after year. It's predictable. I could have told you last year exactly which neighborhoods are seeing high rates of violence this year, just as I can tell you now which neighborhoods are going to see high number of shootings and murders next year. Not just because that is where they always occur, but because the violence is a symptom of greater problems that are allowed to persist year after year, decade after decade in these same neighborhoods. This is where our last story is related to our first story. While the authors of the Team 4 plan and the people in the city government who implemented it and continue to implement it today discussed in great detail in dispassionate academic language the resulting lowering in property values and increase in vacancy would result from the prescribed benign neglect of poor and black neighborhoods. What they don't discuss is the violence, the human misery, the pain and suffering, the dead children that would result. As a policy, official or unofficial, St. Louis has allowed and continues to allow concentrated poverty to persist in certain neighborhoods. There is no redevelopment plan for these areas, surely not one that involves the people who live there today. There is no plan to incentivize investment in those areas. No, completely counterintuitively, the bulk of those investment and incentives are still reserved for the most affluent parts of the city, downtown, midtown, the Central West End. The legacy of the Team 4 plan is about more than land. Far too often, when powerful people talk about redeveloping or investing in North St. Louis, they are speaking exclusively about land, buildings, and property. When I and the other 100,000 people who still live in Northside talk about North St. Louis, we are talking about people, families, kids, who need the attention of our neighbors in the South and Central West End and Midtown and Downtown, City Hall, Jefferson City, Washington, D.C. We need that attention today, not when property values and population numbers have finally fallen so low, the developers think they can finally make a large enough profit, and city leaders think they can finally attract people who they deem more desirable, which just means richer and whiter. There is nothing benign at all about the effect of these policies that they've had on the lives of people devastated by the resulting violence and instability. And so, as these tragic deaths of these children have caught the attention of the region, and citizens are rightfully demanding for action, let us remember that this violence is a predictable result of concentrated poverty, joblessness, rock-bottom property values, lack of bank lending, and general lack of attention from City Hall, that this was all part of the plan. And until we change those conditions, we will continue to have this discussion year after year after year after year. Well, that's our show for today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like and share our videos on Facebook. And check MetroSTL.com every day for new stories and videos. Until next time, I'm Antonio French. Thanks for watching.